Onboard credit, how do you get it and what can you spend it on and why? I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my cruise tips for travelers. I was recently on a cruise and I was lucky enough to have a lot of onboard credit. And that got me thinking about how do you get loads of onboard credit and importantly what you can't spend it on and what are the best things to spend onboard credit on. So let's take a look starting with actually what is onboard credit. The best way to think about onboard credit is it's free money. So it's a bit like someone giving you a gift card or some cash to go and spend on whatever you like. So it's a bit like a gift and it comes normally from the cruise line. So it's basically free money for you to spend on board. So how do you actually get onboard credit? There are 9 key ways that you can get onboard credit. The first of these is from the cruise line when they do promotions. You'll find when itineraries are launched, especially, there are lots of deals and incentives to encourage you to book. So the cruise line will normally throw in some onboard credit, which will normally be per person or per cabin. And this can mount up to quite a lot depending on the grade that you book. The other way that you get onboard credit linked to that is if you book your cruise on the ship. So when you're on another cruise, they pretty much always will throw in onboard credit incentives, again, scaling up based on the length of the cruise or the grade of the cabin that you're actually booking. Those are the most common ways of getting onboard credit, but there are 7 other ways that you can get it. One of those is if you book with an agent, you'll often find that cruise agents will throw in other incentives to try and get you to book with them. And often they are able to offer extra onboard credit. And certainly when you're booking with an agent, ask them if there's any opportunities. They'll often throw in some. Sometimes I guess they'll use some of their commission perhaps to put into onboard credit to encourage you to book with them. One of the ways that I have been very successful at getting onboard credit is by tracking the price of a cruise. So once I've booked a cruise, what I then do is I keep an eye on what the prices are for the grade that I've booked. If you see the price falling dramatically, the cruise line normally is not going to tell you, but what I then do is I either talk to my agent or if I book direct with the cruise line, I say to the cruise line, look, I see that my cabin is now being sold for so many $100 less. What are you going to do? They'll normally offer either an upgrade or what they prefer to do is offer you onboard credit. So for example, the cruise that I've just come off on, there was a dramatic reduction in price because the itinerary was changed and I ended up getting $400 of onboard credit because that was the difference in price. So it's really an important thing to do to keep tracking the price of your cabin on a cruise. It's a great way of getting a lot of extra credit to spend on board. A lot of loyalty programs will also offer onboard credit. So as you work your way up the different tiers, you'll find that onboard credit often gets thrown in as one of the benefits. So loyalty to a cruise line is another great way of getting onboard credit. Some of the cruise lines nowadays have their own credit cards. So if you're a member of their credit card and you spend and you build up points, instead of being able to use those for other things, you can convert those into onboard credit. So if you really love a particular cruise line, check if they have a credit card. You'll find that a lot of the really big well-known names in cruising have a credit card. So it's a great way of just doing your everyday spending and building up credits to your next cruise that you can spend on board. If you have a problem on board, that's another way of getting onboard credits through compensation. So if you have a problem with service or your cabin or whatever, and the cruise line is not able to resolve it, be cheeky and ask if they're prepared to give you any onboard credit as compensation, because that is an easier way of them keeping passengers happy. And of course, it doesn't necessarily cost them a lot of money. So that's a great way of getting onboard credit. So if you're a serving member of the military, and sometimes if you're a veteran, through different ID programs, you're often able to get onboard credit. So if you are a serving member of the military, check if your cruise line offers extra benefits and onboard credit. The last way to get onboard credit is if you're a shareholder in a particular cruise company, and you'll find that you can apply for onboard credit. So for example, I hold shares in the Carnival Cruise Corporation, and I use that whenever I'm going on a cruise to apply for extra onboard credit. Again, it varies based on the length and time of the cruise and the cruise line. It does involve a little bit of admin because you have to contact them, you often have to send them a copy of your booking, a copy of your shareholding, but you can get extra onboard credit by owning shares in a particular cruise company. So those are the 9 key ways you can get onboard credit. Once you've got onboard credit, what on earth can you spend it on, and what are the best things to spend it once you're on board? Before we look at what you can spend onboard credit on, there are probably 4 key watch outs about onboard credit that you should know when you get it and before you think about what you're going to spend it on. First of all, really important is in most cases, onboard credit is non-refundable. So if you don't spend it on board, they're not going to give you the cash. So you need to make sure that you spend all of your onboard credit on board. And the way you can do that, of course, is track it either by getting a printout from guest services or nowadays on the app or the interactive television on most cruise lines. But really important, you're not going to get the cash back. So make sure that you're planning and spending all of your onboard credit when you're on the ship. Most cruise lines won't let you use onboard credit for things you book in advance. So there are a couple that will. So the cruise I was just on, Oceania, for example, they did let you pre-book things and allocate it against your onboard credit. But many other cruise lines I've been on, if you pre-book things online, excursions, drinks, packages, internet, whatever it is, it doesn't come off your onboard credit. So you have to wait until you're on the ship before doing that. So check very carefully if your cruise line lets you allocate pre-booking stuff to your onboard credit. The third key watch out is what you can spend onboard credit does differ slightly by cruise line. So I'm going to talk about the things you can spend it on, but do listen very carefully because there are some cruise lines that won't let you spend onboard credit on certain things. The big and easiest guideline though when it comes to onboard credit is pretty much anything that you can use your cruise card for on the ship. Normally you can allocate to onboard credit. So that's kind of an easy guideline. So let's take a look first of all at what you can and then at what you can't spend onboard credit on. There are 10 key things that you can normally spend onboard credit on. The first of those is excursions, and this is often what I use a lot of my onboard credit for. You can find all sorts of range of excursions at all sorts of prices, and you can allocate your onboard credit to it. It's a great way of spending onboard credit because excursions can be one of the biggest on costs to your cruise fare. So excursions are a really good idea to allocate onboard credit to. The second thing that I like to use onboard credit for is gratuities. You'll find pretty much on every single cruise line you can use onboard credit to offset gratuities. Now there are one or two exceptions, so double check, and if you're not sure, ask at guest services when you get on board if your onboard credit is going to be allocated against gratuities. But most of the cruise lines I've been on will allow you to offset that, and of course that's a cost that you often haven't budgeted for or you forget, and that can mount up. You can spend $200 or more per person on gratuities on a week-long cruise. So onboard credit is a great way of kind of negating that impact. The third thing that I like to use onboard credit, because I see it as sort of free money, is spa treatments. Spa treatments on cruise ships can be quite costly. So using onboard credit is a great way of making that more of a justifiable expense. So I like to use onboard credit for spa treatments if I have any left over after gratuities and excursions. Another great use of onboard credit is for Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi can be pretty expensive on board and you can use onboard credit to buy it. Drinks is also something you could charge against onboard credit. So either buying a drinks package or drinks ad hoc. I tend to buy drinks ad hoc using my onboard credit rather than a drinks package. I don't drink a lot, so I find that ends up being a better use of onboard credit than buying a drinks package. But you can use onboard credit to buy drinks ad hoc or drinks packages. The other key things that you can use it for is if they have a cabana area or sort of a retreat area, you can use onboard credit for that. You can use it for specialty dining. So if you want to go and eat at one of the restaurants, you can use onboard credit for that. You can use it for shopping in the onboard shops. So that's a great thing if you have gifts to buy, if you have onboard credit left. The photographs on board the ship. And the other thing that you can do, which is great for many people, is you can use it for treats. So if you like specialty coffees, gelato, those kind of things in those shops, you can normally use onboard credit to buy those things. So those are the 10 things that you can buy. So what can't you use onboard credit for? Now, pretty much every single ship, there are 3 key things you can't use onboard credit for. First of all, the medical center. So if you need any treatment in the medical center, you can't use onboard credit. Secondly, most cruise lines will not let you use it for gambling or bingo. There are a couple of exceptions, and that does change over time. So particularly with Carnival and Royal Caribbean, you can often use onboard credit. So just double check if you're going on those. Most of the other lines I've come across don't let you. So do double check, but assume that you can't use it for gaming and gambling. And the third thing you can't use it is to book your next cruise. Certainly when you're on a cruise, lots and lots of people book the next cruise, but unfortunately you can't use onboard credit as your deposit. Onboard credit, it's free money. Work at those 9 things to try and get as much onboard credit as you can. I had loads of onboard credit on my last cruise. It was fantastic because I could do things that I probably wouldn't normally do on a cruise, and it felt like it wasn't costing me any money. I have loads more cruise tips for travelers videos, so why don't you watch another one of those right now?